Welcome to the next webinar in our Plantae webinar series. My name is Katie Rogers, and I'm your host for today's webinar. This webinar series is brought to you today by Plantae, the open online community for plant scientists, powered by the American Society of Plant Biologists. I would like to give a special thank you to all of our ASPB members who are attending today. Your ASPB membership dues help support and make these webinars possible. For any of you who have not yet joined ASPB, you can join today and use the discount code webinar10 to receive a 10% discount on registration. ASPB members get early access to these seminars. You can learn more about ASPB and the opportunities we provide at aspb.org. Before we get started, I'd like to go over a few things just to make sure you get the most out of attending today's webinar. If you're experiencing technical issues, please let us know about those using the chat box or by emailing me at krogers@aspb.org. If you have any questions for our guests, please add them to the Zoom question and answer Q&A section. I will be moderating your questions and will share them periodically. If you have trouble connecting or need to leave this webinar early, know that a recording will be made available along with all of the associated materials within a few days. Follow our Plantae YouTube channel to receive notifications when new content is posted. All right, so without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Al Myers. Al is a postdoctoral research associate at the Ohio University in the Department of Environmental and Plant Biology. He is also an ASPB ambassador and currently the vice chair of the ASPB ECPS section. He's going to share a little bit about ASPB and the ECPS section and serve as our moderator for today's section. Thanks, Al.
Thank you, Katie. As Katie said, my name is Al Myers. I am the vice chair of the ASPB Early Career Plant Scientist section. If you haven't heard about our section, we're pretty new. The idea behind the section is to give early careers, younger folks in the plant biology community representation within our home community, ASPB, and also to provide resources to early careers, be they undergrads, graduate students, postdocs, pre-tenure faculty, those kinds of things. And so this is one of the things that we like to do. We ran a session similar to this at the national meeting last year, and it went really well. So we figured we'd try this again, and hopefully this will go pretty well today. So we are going to begin by having our panelists introduce themselves. So I'll just go left to right on my screen. Katie McIntyre, do you want to begin?
Hey everyone, I'm Katie McIntyre. I am at Colorado State University in Fort Collins. I saw there was another CSU attendant here, which is pretty cool. Oh, nice. A lot of CSU attendees. This is cool. I am a 5th year PhD student, and I work in a lab studying plant immunity and really just like the role of plant hormones and really the molecular side. So I'm not in like crops. I'm really on the lab bench every day. Like I never go on the field, so.
Awesome, thanks, Katie. Jordan?
Hi, I'm Jordan. I'm a 4th year PhD student at University of Central Florida in Orlando. I'm currently transitioning to a postdoc in Davis, but currently, I work on understanding the evolutionary ecology of plant chemical communication, specifically through volatile organic compounds, and working to try to understand how certain pests and pathogens can take advantage of these compounds. But I work at the intersection of sort of crop and other like wild species and wild relatives as well. Like my primary model system is sunflowers, but I work in everything from like willows to camellia and other sort of plant species.
Great. Helen?
Hi, my name is Helen Liu. I'm a 3rd year PhD candidate at University of California, Berkeley. My research is essentially trying to figure out how does the photosynthetic apparatus modify itself to survive in low iron nutrition, and I use some algal species like Chlamydomonas, a common model organism, and a halo-tolerant Benelliella. And I use a lot of biochemistry and a lot of omics techniques.
Great. Brianna?
Hi, my name is Brianna Griffin. I'm a third year PhD candidate at Iowa State University. I study molecular plant pathology. I look at acetylation and different post-translational modifications and how they impact plant pathogen interactions. Our lab is a proteomics lab, so I do a lot of proteomics and multi-omics techniques as well.
Great. And lastly, Karina.
Hi everyone, I'm Karina. I am a fifth-year PhD candidate at Texas A&M, where my research looks at using diversity and genome editing to better understand daced flowering. But over the summer, I'll be taking a position with USDA, where I'll be looking at the genetics behind male sterility in cotton.
Awesome, great, thanks everybody. And so kind of the way that we're going to do this is I'm going to just check out the Q&A and read answers from there, and we're going to keep this pretty casual conversational. So whichever panelists have some input, we can just we'll just pop in whenever relevant. So this first question is from John. John says, agronomist with a master's in plant breeding and genetics, currently looking for a PhD position in a relevant field, namely omics, biotechnology, etc. What should, oh, sorry, I lost that. What should I take into consideration before choosing a PhD thesis when I like all of those fields the same?
I can try to answer. So really when you kind of find like a lab and an advisor that covers your field, but in my experience, I didn't get to like pick a thesis. I entered a lab based on what I like and what I enjoy and how I mixed with the advisor. But I really didn't get to change the direction of the lab, if that makes sense. So you really pick a lab which covers a topic you like. And in my sense, my advisor had like 3 projects that were funded. And from there, she asked me like, what kind of fit would I like? And how do you like this project? So I don't know if that answers your question directly, but I think more of how do I pick my thesis should be changed to what does the lab study that I'm interested in.
I'd like to just piggyback off of that. So I had the opposite experience of that. So I picked my advisor based off of my like interactions with him, and also he was starting a new lab and I wanted to go into academia. So I wanted to learn what it took to start a lab from the ground up, which is very difficult in case anybody was wondering about those sort of things. But basically, like the only main connections that me and my advisor have between sort of our research programs that we've generated is that we both work on sunflowers. Like his is more leaf ecophysiology, sort of these other types of things. So I ended up picking a separate type of research avenue in the field and sort of generated my own ideas generated sort of my own topic for my thesis, which has been like sort of helpful on the out end. But like funding is an issue that you should think about and consider that. I was sort of fortunate that I started with an assistant professor who had startups, so it was easy for me to like pay for these small scale experiments that I needed.
And I just want to add one thing. Sorry, you were done, Jordan, right? Okay, good. Because when I first started grad school was just kind of generally interested in molecular biology. Like I worked with corn before and I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do after that. So one thing that was really appealing when I was looking at graduate schools was schools that had rotations, like where you can actually try like different labs out. Not all schools do this, but it was something for me that I did want to do because I wasn't sure exactly where I wanted to end up, since I was just kind of a broad, I like molecular biology and I like plants, now what? So that's kind of how I started to narrow down, like looking at schools and everything. So I think that potentially could be something that you would like to look into as well.
Great, thanks for the input from the panelists. Thanks for the question. Our next question comes from Hayden. What challenges did you face in choosing a lab and advisor, and what helped you make your decision? What were your rotation experiences, if any?
Okay, well, I can start. I did have rotations. So one challenge was for me was I actually liked 2 of the labs like a lot. And so that was one. So I had 3 rotations and they were about 8 weeks, but I know some schools have shorter and some have a little bit longer. And sometimes you can do like a 4th one if you want to. You know, sometimes you have to be a little careful though, because you don't want to spend too much time like doing all these rotations when they may not actually, things you learn in those labs may not necessarily help you in the lab you end up in. But my experience with the rotations, I actually enjoyed them. I was glad that I did them. The first lab I rotated with, I actually, it just wasn't a good fit for me. You know, everything was fine. The research was interesting, but I just didn't mesh well with everybody. It was okay. And then the second lab I enjoyed as well. I really liked the research in that one. And then the 3rd lab, which is the lab I ended up in now with my mentor, Justin Wally, was a perfect fit. It was like the research was super exciting for me. The lab mates, like everybody was great. The grad students, the postdocs were helpful. I really liked the PI. It was just a great fit. Like even the hours that this lab worked, it was kind of like, was way better for me. They're more evening shift, late afternoon, evening, which is how I like to work. I don't like the 8 to 5 if I can help it. So anyway, those are my experiences with it.
I can tell you that, so I started in my lab as an undergrad. I came from a biochem background but I knew everything in humans and then happened to get a position in a plant lab. So it's kind of weird. But that advisor was the one that I chose to stay with grad school, because I can tell you from my experience, and then I've seen people with the opposite experience, is your advisor is going to make or break you. You can like the science, but if you have a crappy advisor or somebody that doesn't care about you or wants to fit you in a path that you don't not necessarily want to go down, it's going to break you. And that's going to be like emotionally, or just they don't care or they're not involved. So if I can give you any advice, your advisor is extremely important. For you to mesh and communicate well with them is really important.
And to piggyback off of Katie's comment, is like not only mesh well with your advisor, but mesh well with your lab mates, with the postdocs in the lab, with the research scientists in the lab, because if your advisor becomes more hands-off because they're later in their career or something like that, those are the people who you're going to go to on your day-to-day interactions to make sure that like you're doing your gel correctly, or they're the ones who's going to help you troubleshoot all your experiments, or ones that you're going to talk about in terms of proper controls and such. And so just definitely have that support system outside of just your advisor, because that can also make or break you too.
Adding to that, I think a good point to make is like when you're thinking about what lab to pick, you should think about the structure that works best for you. Like I was saying, I worked for an assistant professor and I wanted a tinier lab. I wanted that more intimate connection. So I was my advisor's first PhD student, and there was a army of undergrads and me and him. And I got a lot of one-on-one attention, which has been really, really helpful as far as learning more of the professional development aspects. And I think like, don't be scared of not taking a rotation program. So I didn't do rotation programs because I had already sort of had a lot of undergrad research experience and like was already working at the time. And so I had a more clear idea on the types of work that I wanted to do. And so by identifying a PhD advisor before I was like applying to specific schools, it like got me through the process a bit faster as well too.
And adding on to what Jordan was just saying, program coordinators can be a really good point of contact to start with. I know that's what I did at Texas A&M. And our grad chair was actually able to point me to people who already had funding and were actively looking for graduate students. So I wasn't just randomly contacting people who were automatically going to shoot me down and say, no, I don't have the capability to take on any students right now.
There's a question in the chat, sorry, about how close the interaction with your advisor. It's an interesting question because I am very close to my advisor. I cry in her office often. So you do have like, as a mentor-mentee, you have this emotional connection, but my mentor is very, very aware of maintaining that boundary of not becoming friends. So like, I feel like I can come to her when I have a personal issue and, you know, sometimes they'll ask you like, how are you? And you just unload, and you don't mean to unload, but it does happen. So there is, I guess there needs to be that boundary, but there also needs to be some type of vulnerability where you can tell them that like, my personal life is burning down right now, so my work is going to be affected and you just need to know.
Yeah, great input from everybody. I agree with all of that. And that was a great question to ask right after the how do you choose your field question, because, you know, how do you choose a lab and what you're going to be working on? Kind of those considerations of who your advisor is and how the lab works can be just as important as your research question, or even more important, you know, whether you're going to have a good time during your PhD or during your master's degree in the lab often has more to do with the people that you're in the lab with than you know what you're actually working on. So those are all great considerations. A question from Benjamin, incoming PhD candidate. Have you found that you need to work on your own for networking and presenting and other extracurricular career building opportunities, or does a department and advisor help?
So I can talk about this a little bit. So I work more, I guess, in like chemical ecology, but my advisor doesn't. So a lot of his connections are more in people who do like more basic sort of physiology type work. So as far as like building connections in more of the sort of biochem world, I've had to do that on my own, but it is kind of nice at the same time, because then like when you're sort of talking to these individuals and making these connections, they're not just like, oh, you're so-and-so student, like, oh, they know your name and they know that your ideas are coming from you because they don't know your advisor. So it's kind of a grab bag. You just, if you're a very extroverted person and find it easy to be like, oh, I recognize this name from a paper that I read and I can like walk up to them and talk to them about it. It's nice to be able to do that sort of independently, but also having your advisor as a good connect is like really, really important too.
I'd like to add that for me, it's a little bit of both. So I do have opportunities that my PI will like say, hey, I think you should either apply to this, or I think you'd be a good fit for this. And at like conferences and stuff, he does set me up with some people who he knows, some of his collaborators. But I also do a lot of stuff on my own where I say that this is interesting for me. This I think will further my career prospects. This will make my CV look better. This will just help me make more connections. And I have the, I guess, self-initiative to like do that. Because I know, at least in my experience, it's like, you know, your PIs only do so much in terms of like giving you these opportunities, and a lot more it's just on you to do them if you want to or not. So.
Yeah, similar to that vein is that, you know, sometimes your advisor is in one side of that particular field and you want to go into something else. Like for me, it was computational biology. My PI, she is a biochemist by training, chemist by training, but I had to go to computational route because of the pandemic. And so I decided to go out and find my own collaborators who are experts in computational biology to start teaching me some of the things so I can actually progress with my degree. And so definitely, like, as your project progresses, you'll find like, oh, we need this item, and you start making those networks, start making those collaborations to help you move forward with your project.
Quick little plug for ASPB. I think we're all involved in ASPB. That's extracurricular, and my advisor kind of pushed me to get involved a little bit, but it really took off on my own. And sometimes she will even tell me like, you know, you should focus a little bit more on your research. But through ASPB and getting involved with ECPS, these early career people, has honestly bloomed my network to a level that I never imagined. So I would highly recommend getting involved in a society. In ASPB, we can talk on the personal level that I love this group of people. So I think you all should think about joining.
Great, thanks everybody. A question from the audience. What are the differences between the expectations of a master's student versus those for a PhD student?
So I guess so I did a master's too before I did my PhD. And I guess like sort of the people that I was interviewing with for my PhD, like it was expected that you used a portion of the system, but your PhD was completely independent. Like you're building your research trajectory that is divergent from what the lab does, because I guess the advisors I was looking for were specifically putting out PhD students to make collaborators into the future. Whereas like when I was saying with, when I did my master's, and those sort of expectations were just like, can you show that you are competent in doing something and read a graph? Like that's sort of the level. Like there's a lot of technical skills that you need to develop and things like that, but it's more showing competency versus like, I would say a PhD is showing the demonstration that you can build larger projects and larger ideas that are sort of independent of your sort of, I guess, education.
Yeah, so adding on to Jordan, I would kind of say a lot of my difference between my master's and my PhD has been the scale of the projects that I'm working on. So a lot of them are, because I did my master's with my same advisor that I'm now doing my PhD with. So a lot of the topics stayed the same, but the scale that I'm doing things at and the complexity of the projects definitely increased.
Yeah, and I would add, I went straight to my PhD, but from my experience that I've interacted with a lot of master students during that time, and kind of the misconception that I had coming in was that a master's degree is a total sprint. It's usually just 2 years, and it's not like with a PhD, it's long enough that you can kind of take your classes and get used to things and develop your project in a few years. And it's kind of a couple of years of classes and a few years of research. Everybody's experience is a bit different, whether that holds true or not. But with a master's degree, I mean, you only have 2 years to complete a scientific project, right, to answer a question. So it is really stuffed into 2 years of all your classes and your science, and it's a bit of a sprint. And everybody that I've talked to that's done a master's degree, there's great science that comes out of master's degrees, but you're certainly busy the whole time, and that's true of a PhD as well. But it's almost like a sprint versus a marathon for master's versus PhD. I'll take another question here. This question is from Evelyn. Were your academic paths linear? Did you go straight from undergrad through to your PhDs?
Kind of. So I took a year off in undergrad and partied a lot. And then I got really serious and I came back to school. And then after I got my undergrad degree, I took a year off and did what's called like a post-bac, so post-baccalaureate. So I worked in the same department, but in a different lab, and then ended up coming back to the same lab that I worked in undergrad. But I did start from undergrad straight to PhD.
I did the same as Katie, where in a similar vein, where I went straight from undergrad to my PhD program without a gap in between. So I graduated in June or May, and then I started my graduate school in September.
Helen, do you regret not taking more time off between the two? I always wonder.
And at that moment, I think it was the right decision. But looking back, it would have been really nice to at least have a semester off, because you're so burnt out from at least an undergrad, and then you have to go switch your brain into grad school again, that it took me at least a couple months for me to get into the groove of things and get back into serious about my studies and PhD and such. But it was nice because I was on a rotation system, so there wasn't that pressure of doing research or doing research for a PhD later on.
I can talk about sort of nonlinear paths. So I did undergrad research, which was actually in like snake phylogenetics, so it's like nothing I do now. And after that, I knew I wanted to go to grad school, but I didn't really know what I wanted to do. So I was running the educational department for this human anatomy and physiology museum during the day. And then at night, I was working in like a nightclub slash strip club. So that was just like what I was doing. And it was honestly taught me so much, just like having this like science job where, people are still like respecting me for my intellectual side, but then also this other job that was completely dependent on my social skills. It was really, really helpful. So that as soon as I started my master's, I already knew like how to talk to people in science and how to sort of work. And then at the same time, I already had those social skills. So when I needed to go to like conferences and things like that, I already knew how to sell my research and sell me as a person. And so building those skills have been like invaluable in my sort of success in academia so far. But also I'm like older now, so there's that too, but it's been fun.
Yeah, I just launched a poll to ask our audience that question. So if it's on your screen, feel free to weigh in on that.
I had a bit of a nonlinear path myself. I graduated with a bachelor's degree in biochemistry. And then I took a year and coached wrestling, and I worked in a microbiology lab, and I did a lot of landscaping and roofing. And I will say that similar to as one of the panelists said, it's your mind gets out of science fairly easily. So you I remember after a year of not doing those things, getting back into the mindset of interviewing for positions and talking science. So if you do choose to take some time off, I recommend keeping it fresh in your mind in any way that you can, whether that's talking to your friends and family about it or reading papers or however that might be. Another question from the chat. Good question here. Should you be worried if your lab of interest in a program hasn't published any papers in 4 or 5 years? Do you suggest to work with that advisor?
I can speak on that directly. That's my situation. So my advisor was, I guess I'm her like 3rd student to come up. She just got tenured, but she has really high standards. So, we have a very small lab of 4, 5 people. And we published a bunch of reviews because that's a really good thing to do early on in your career, master's or PhD, because it forces you to read and forces you to learn. But we have been building, each of us have our own story, our own project, and we've been building it and building it and building it. And, I'm 5 years in and nobody in my lab has yet published research out of my lab. We all are about to do it at one time. So there's that. So I would not say that it is a negative. I would ask about it though, to an advisor. Why have you not published? Because in my situation, we are individually building one story instead of collaborating on everyone's projects to publish faster. My advisor also wants to publish high in a high impact journal. So that kind of requires a lot more data, a lot more of a storyline to publish.
Yeah, and I also think it's field specific. So I work with Clement and Monis, and so I can get it to I can do one experiment per week from start to finish. And say if you did it with Arabidopsis, that'll be, a couple weeks. And then for corn and other systems, it's going to be much, much longer. So take into consideration. And on top of that, ask the PI, because sometimes the PI doesn't update their website or their Google Scholar. And so it might seem like they haven't published in 4 to 5 years, but definitely reach out and say, hey, I'm really interested in your lab. Do you have any recent papers I can read?
Also, something to think about with the type of work that you're producing in your PhD is like, it's nice to have a mixture of types of projects. So I would say, like, even for me, the first couple papers that I got out in my first and second year, like those were all papers that were very like short stories that were more to sort of help me develop an understanding of what it takes to publish a paper. What does it mean to put something through peer review, which is a really important process that you need to go through during your PhD, which can be helpful. But yeah, like having these large projects is super important, but also as part of your own individual development plan with your PI, like you should, when am I going to get the opportunities to publish, and like, what is that going to look like for me, so that you have that training before you leave.
Bouncing off you, Jordan, diversity of projects is a really good idea, because science doesn't always work and things fail and crash and burn. And if it's your only project, it is devastating. I have seen people, and I felt parts of my project crash and burn, and you take it personally. Obviously it's not in the scheme of things, but diversity of a project is a really good thing to have.
speaking about that too, like I know we talked about like thesis ideas and how you come up with them. A thesis isn't always just like one long story. Like it can be a portfolio of things. And also that's sort of something that I always recommend to people to do. Like if you do projects that require sequential steps to them, that means if that project doesn't work or takes a really long time for that project to work, you're just adding time to your sort of degree completion. Whereas if you choose a set of 3 or 4 projects that sort of form a cohesive story together, but don't need to like depend on one another, it's a lot easier for you to get through things.
And kind of going back to the publication thing, so I would say the bigger concern would be, have they continued to receive funding throughout those 4 or 5 years? Because like people are saying, a lot of these stories can sometimes take much longer than sometimes even one grad student's career to get the story out and published. But the bigger thing is your advisor going to have the money to continue paying you throughout that duration, even if a paper isn't made within 4 years?
Yeah, great answers. Another question from the audience. What are your goals after the PhD? More importantly, how do you work towards that goal during your PhD? Like what activities, courses, or projects within the PhD project or on the side did you take up? Or what mentoring did you seek out?
I guess I can chime in. So I'm trying to go the academic route. I want to position at R1 University. I kind of decided that early on that I either wanted that or an industry type project manager job. And in order to do that, I knew that it wasn't just important to have experience mentoring students, but experience managing students' projects to completion. So I manage a lot of undergrads and I've had a few published. By the end of this year, there should be 6 of my undergrad students have first authored a paper while I was like mentoring them. So that's the type of thing that I really wanted to learn how to do. And I sought mentorship from like my advisor because of that. That was also the reason I picked my advisor, because he was assistant professor. So he's fresh off the job market and knew what kind of skills people were looking in interviews. Other things that have been really helpful for me is I did a like mild internship with the College of Sciences, they don't call it a vice dean, but like second assistant dean, there we go. And so I was working on like diversity and equity inclusion sort of stuff with him and sort of talking through like politics that happen within a university and how to sort of traverse that space. And so being a professor is you have so many hats that you have to wear. So as far as my mentorship has gone, it's been like trying to seek that level of like, how do I maintain student productivity to get them producing papers? How do I budget and plan for an academic position? And at the same time, how do I exist within a university system as such that I can get like funding and support for my students and like projects that I want to do?
I have a very different path. So I don't want to stay in academia. I do not enjoy it that much. But I went through this process of bouncing around. So when you go through, I mean, we've all been in school for like 20 plus years. So going through academia is to me, not wanting to do that is a very direct path. You know the steps you need to take, you know what you need to do, but I want to go into politics originally. I wanted to do, not necessarily work in a government agency, but I really wanted to be like a liaison between science and making legislation that's scientifically sound. And I actually had to kind of change my path a little bit because I don't see a way straight out of grad school right into politics because no one knows me. There is no easy route. There's a few little routes to get scientists into politics, but it takes a lot more years after graduation to really have like a better chance of getting there. And now I've actually changed my idea that I want to go into consulting. So I really like problem solving. Like it's like, I love it. It like encapsulates my brain. So I've really kind of gone from politics to consulting, and to do that, to get a job there, I really need to expand a network. It's going to be based a lot on who I know, to be able to like get your foot in the door. So it's a completely different path in academia.
And then I'll say, I'm debating still between academia and industry, and as a result, I'm kind of pursuing both paths right now, which is a lot of extra work. But one thing that I liked about Iowa State is it's actually near a lot of huge like ag companies, right? So I'm near Corteva and I'm near Bayer, and I have all these big companies here. Iowa State also has a NSF traineeship program called Plant Predictive Phenomics, where they actually we have like kind of a connection with Corteva, where they actually like sponsor like the plant breeding symposium every year, and they sponsor some of our P3 like traineeship like events and like symposiums as well. So that is kind of how I've started interacting with industry like in the area and getting some connections with Corteva. Another thing you can do for industry, just because I feel like Jordan definitely covered the academic route very well. You can ask your PI or other people who may work with different industry people in the area and see if they have any connections for you and try to like reach out to them and see if they can try to set you up with internships or try to look into things like that as well. I know I have a lot of friends who wanted to do different internships who actually have, you know, internet like Bayer or Corteva like over the summer and stuff like that. So industry also, I think it's about networking and trying to show that you can do management projects as well. Like, can you actually like lead certain projects, things like that.
Yeah, great. I agree with all that. Another interesting question that I suspect that most of the panelists may have different answers for. Do you think it would be beneficial to be involved in committees or clubs while in grad school, or should the primary focus be on research and publications? Have any of you been involved in organizing committees during grad school, and how was that experience?
100% do something other than research, because, you know, research doesn't always go really well. And some days, some months you have really low times, some months you have really high times. And those extracurricular activities, those committees, those interactions outside of your lab, outside of your own research is what's going to keep you sane.
I think what I will say though is make sure you have a balance between how many leadership things you're doing at one time. I had a moment where I realized I was saying yes to too many things. I usually have about 4 leadership positions each semester, any given time. I'm trying to, at one point I had like 6 and I was like, this is way too much like stuff. And I had to like lower it because it was too much. So you just have to make sure you're balancing your time. In the earlier years, that may be fine. But once you really start getting into your research and your projects really start picking up, those leadership, you know, even if each one's just a little bit, all together, they become a lot. So just make sure you're balancing it out, because ultimately at the end of the day, you are there for research. But I would also go further and say that make sure you're still doing like your hobbies and trying to do the things that you enjoy as well, because it is a marathon and you have to make sure you're staying sane while you're doing it, because things are not always going to go your way. And sometimes that can be devastating if you put a lot of effort and work into something. And just at the end of the day, you need to make sure you're still, you know, hanging out with people, or, you know, reading that book you like to read, or whatever it is for you, working out, going on a hike. Just make sure you're still doing those things that like keep you in check.
One thing I want to add as far as like leadership positions and stuff like that goes, because it can get super overwhelming really fast. But I think it's important to remember that you're here for a degree and not just any kind of degree. It's a training degree. So the way I like sort of choose to say yes or no to sort of leadership positions or projects is based off of like, what training am I going to get based off of like managing this organization or whatnot. And if it's something I've already done in my PhD, I'm not going to do it again. You can provide some sort of consulting and like, you know, maybe be a member in this sort of thing, but you got to keep like sort of tacking on those experiences and learning new things. And I think that can be helpful when deciding.
Yeah, and the other thing that I would add on is a lot of these leadership opportunities really do offer a great place for networking outside of where you may already network. So I, during my time here at Texas A&M, launched the Genome Editing Symposium. And through that, I was actually able to build a lot of connections in industry that I still hold on to now, and I'm actually able to use in a new project that I'm working on with SACNAS and trying to get plant sciences more involved in SACNAS. Yeah, I would say don't just think about it as a leadership opportunity, but also recognize that you can build a lot of new connections with your peers and with people outside of your university through these opportunities.
I agree, very good. This question comes from Emmeline. Hello, I'm currently looking for PhD advisors for this upcoming application cycle. How did y'all prepare to first contact them, and how early do you suggest contacting them? I've read their research and a few articles, however, I still feel unprepared to email them.
Anxiety. I know the feeling. First off, have your friends read your email, even if it's just for a confidence boost or just to make sure that you don't sound like a dingus. I would highly recommend just having your friends read it, but don't be too scared and don't let that anxiety get in the way of contacting a lot of advisors. And don't be ashamed if they don't get back to you within a week. Some people take a really long time to email back, so don't get discouraged. But reading some papers, I would start with a review, something really light you can get, because if you get, I've heard this from advisors before, but if you get in front of an advisor and you try to start talking about their science when you're in an interview and you say something that's not right, or you say something that, you know, you think you know what's right, like your advisor, that person, the advisor is going to see right through you. So don't try to like make you seem like you know their research better than them. Ask about their research, get them talking. That's like the main thing. You want to ask about them, because you really want to see too, like if that meshes and that fits, and that organic conversation that you have is really, you know, something that fits with you.
And in terms of timing, just to add on to Katie's comment, is that start during the summer, right before you're about to apply for grad school, a couple months before you apply for grad school, because if you really do mesh with this advisor via email, you might have them, they not only will vouch for you during the application cycle, but they'll also help work with you on fellowship applications that are usually due in the fall. And so that you can apply with them, write your research proposal with them, and, you know, see if you can get money while working with your potential future advisor. But again, just because you worked on a fellowship application with them doesn't mean that you are locked in with that advisor. But I just, you know, you can start getting that mentor-mentee relationship going way earlier on than just entering into grad school.
Yeah, the other thing that I would add on to Helen is some grad programs are on more of a rolling admissions. So I know where I'm at, we accept in the fall, spring, and summer. And so there's not really necessarily a wrong time. So if you're trying to contact someone in the fall or in the spring, you may not have exactly missed the boat, but it will be harder to get some of those institutional fellowships with them.
I have something I want to add. So I know people that have not a great resume in their undergrad, but still really want to go to grad school, and you will get blocked out from just the application of grad school if like your GPA isn't X, Y, or Z or whatever. If that's the case and something happened in your life or whatever it may be, and your resume doesn't look good from undergrad, contact the advisor that you're interested in, because if you form a relationship with them and they see that you are a good student and you care, they don't care about what your GPA is in your undergrad. So they will vouch for you within the university as well.
Also just to add on that, on the flip side, there's also like when you're applying to different programs, there's different styles of department graduate admissions. So from what I'm aware, most rotation programs, you're like applying to the university and like hopefully somebody vouches for you, but if not, it's not like a big deal. But for most like ecology and evolutionary programs, like if your advisor isn't like, yeah, I want that student, I've already talked to them, we already have a project idea laid out, like you're just not getting it. Like it doesn't matter if you have a 4.0 GPA and coming with hundreds of thousands of dollars, maybe if you have hundreds of thousands of dollars. But it's important to think about that. And like one thing I just wanted to add about the emailing, I know when I started emailing professors, thinking about the structure of what that email should look like really terrified me and gave me a lot of anxiety. So what I always recommend to have it be is 3 paragraphs, 3 like short paragraphs. Number 1 being like, this is what I think you do that I think is interesting. This is what I want to do that I think is cool. This is a potential project idea that I'd like to talk to you about. Those 3 things show that you can like sort of understand what they do. You're thinking about your future and how you're going to use your degree. And then also you just like have an idea of what you can do, because it's really nice to be able to like hit the ground running when you do start.
Yeah, Jordan, that's a really important point. And that's kind of what I was going to say, that the grad programs are often structured differently. So I remember, you know, a couple of years ago, I was really trying to get this answer of like, because all the undergrads always ask, should I email the professor or just apply to the program or do both? And is one absolutely necessary? And I think it never hurts to email the PI you're looking into joining their lab. But as Jordan was saying, you know, some of them, if there are lab rotations, you really are kind of applying to the program, and you know, maybe the PIs don't have that much input, and there are other programs where if you apply and you don't have the PI looking for your name and saying yes, then you're probably not going to get in. So it's hugely variable in that way, but never does hurt, and it always encourage you to email the person you're interested in working with. Interesting question here. How important is an undergrad degree in a related field, like biology or plant sciences? Would any undergrad background work? Would any undergrad background be able to study plant sciences in grad school?
So I can speak on this. My undergrad degree is a psychology, and I'm a minor in biology. So that seems really out of left field. Like, how did this even happen? So I actually probably should have spoke up on the nonlinear path as well. I entered undergrad from an art school, and I initially was like, I'm going to go to med school. Like, that's my goal here. And I was like, I'm going to do psychology because I'm super interested in psychiatry or neurology or something like that. But I was also part of this program called Women in Math, Science, and Engineering. And they like really had a big push for starting research early. So I actually started working in a maze genetics lab in my, I think the beginning of my sophomore year. And I stayed in that lab the entire time I was there. So I decided at some point that I was like, okay, I need to take more biology classes and everything. Part of that was because of the pre-med recs as well. But, you know, I started doing this and I kept working in the lab, and I was like, I'm much more interested in plant biology. You know, I had started doing shadowing at the hospital and everything. And I was like, this isn't for me. So in the end, I graduated with my psych degree, but then I applied to grad schools, like different plant biology PhDs. So what I would say is there's some people who are going to care, and there's some people who don't at all. I think you need to be able to justify it. Like, there was one school I visited, they were like, are you sure you can handle like the classes? Like, you know, you don't have maybe as good of a full biology background, or maybe, you know, you didn't come from an ag school, you know, you haven't taken all these plant classes. Like, are you sure you can do it? Versus other people were like, that's awesome. I also was like interested in like pre-med, or, oh, that's really cool, you have a psych degree. I bet you can diagnose some people around here, you know, make jokes and stuff. So I think as long as you can kind of explain like your path, your journey, like why you have that degree, I don't think it's really going to be a big deal. I would just address it in your personal statement, you know, just how you got there. I would say most people don't care.
To add on to that, I actually have a degree from agronomy school. So I have a degree in crop sciences from University of Illinois. I also have a minor in chemistry, but I don't actually use my degree and my knowledge in plant biology that much, because ever since I got into a plant biology program, a PhD program, but my project doesn't really require me to know all this like broad plant biology background, because I switched systems. I switched into an algal system. Yeah, I kept a lot of the things I learned from photosynthesis, but again, I switched to an algal system. I think I needed more on data science and computational biology and mathematics and learning Python and R, which my plant biology degree didn't really prepare me for. And I just think that again, just to hone in the point, it doesn't really matter, but again, depends on the institution. Some institutions I know highly look at, you need a really strong plant biology background. Some institutions, like my institution, I think out of the cohort of 7 plant biology students, only 2 of them actually have a plant biology background. There's one person in microbiology, another person in general biology, or 2 people in general biology, and 1 in animal sciences. So it's really, how do you think? Do you have a passion for plant biology, and can you justify it in your personal statement?
Great. This question comes from Eva. How long did it take you guys to pick out a research project / thesis? Did any of you have projects in mind prior to starting?
I didn't know anything about plants. I came from biochemistry, liked my advisor. I liked doing molecular stuff. I had no idea what I was doing, so no.
My research ideas came from 2 movies. Number 1 is The Happening by M. Night Shyamalan, and number 2 is The Arrival. And basically, because of that, I knew I'm like, oh, okay, plants talk to each other. Maybe there's some sort of pattern to understanding this, and I can use pattern recognition techniques. So I had an idea of like a basic, like mid-tier level project that I initially did. And like, that was really helpful, and it has blossomed into a bunch of other projects and things like that. But yeah, movies can be helpful.
For me, it was the grant. So we have different grants and different projects and such. And so I picked the grant or of the projects that I really liked. But, when I entered grad school, every single experiment that I kind of started just didn't work out until, so in grad school, we have this thing called, at least some of us have qualification exams. So you usually take it in your 2nd year of grad school. And this is when you turn from a PhD student to a PhD candidate. And during that time, you're supposed to write a research proposal, what you're proposing to do for grad school. And it wasn't until a couple months before I was taking my qualifications exam that I actually finally hone in, okay, this is our aim 1, aim 2, aim 3 that I actually want to do for the rest of my PhD. Before it was just a bunch of failed experiments, bunch of failed hypotheses, and that kind of led to the final qualifications exam.
My experience was pretty similar to Helen's, where I was more interested in the lab as a whole and their projects, and I was doing stuff related to a grant that I was really interested in that they had. And then again, for my prelim exam, when I actually started sitting down to write, actually the first time I really thought about it was for the GRFP application, which is just a big fellowship. If you're not familiar with it yet, you'll be familiar with it once you start school. But it's kind of like the big first grant that a lot of people do. And it is a fellowship, so it's more about you than the research. But that was the first time I really sat down to think about what do I actually want to do. And then for my my prelim exam, it was the same thing. I had to write a proposal for this exam, and that's when I really teased out all of my aims, what I was going to do for each part, what the hypothesis was for everything, what is my end goal, and is it feasible in the time that I want to be here? So,
Yeah, I think this is another one of those things that goes back to it's hugely variable. There are some PIs that kind of expect you say, hey, this is what I work on generally. Here are the papers that we just wrote in the past 5 years. Think up another project and do something in this vein, and I'll say yes or no. And then there are other PIs who will say, this is the project you're doing, and read up and figure it out. So that can be hugely variable. So that may be one of the things, we talked about how do you find an advisor earlier. So that may be one of the things that you want to ask them. Another different question here. Any tips for even before grad school, like before undergrad? So kind of, I guess, if you want to eventually go into grad school, how do you choose, or how do you start thinking about undergrad programs?
Choosing whether or not to go to grad school is a much bigger thing than I was prepared for. Grad school is really hard. It's really hard. I am one of the most mentally stable people I've ever met. And I have found breaking points many times. And I think the mental health of grad school needs to be talked about more because it is really hard. And the time period in your life is also weird too, because people are starting families and having babies, and major things happen in your life, like people die. it's a really strange time in your life. So even thinking about going to grad school is really, it's a huge decision, and you don't need to take it lightly. I don't mean to scare you either, though.
I totally agree with Katie. It's just like, it's a roller coaster ride. Like some days are just super, super bad. Some days are really like, it's amazing. This is why I came into science. And you have to remember holding that feeling why you came to science, because there's going to be days, months where you're just like, I can't do this. Like, I'm not smart enough. You're just battling with the imposter syndrome every single day. But again, I'm not to scare anybody, but like, you have to really think about it, because for me, I think I didn't really think about it. I thought it was the most obvious next choice if I wanted to continue in science, without really thinking about like the mental strain it's going to take on you. So definitely don't consider it lightly. And if you do get into grad school and want to and do well in grad school, have a really great support system, either inside your lab or outside of your lab.
So
Also,
go ahead. I was just gonna say, I'm not sure what the if the person was saying like how to choose the undergrad for their grad school, or if they were talking about tips in undergrad, like to get into grad school. I would say in terms of the actually picking your undergrad institution, I don't know that it totally matters, because I know people who went to PUIs or who went to big R1 schools who had lots of research experience and others who didn't. I think a lot of that's going to depend on the program that you want to eventually apply to. I would say try to get into research earlier if you can, so that you eventually maybe can actually do your own project and are not just, necessarily shadowing or, just like cleaning the dishes like in the lab. In terms of like grades and things like that, they matter, but they probably don't as much as you think they do, in terms of like, you don't need like a 4.0 or anything like that. I think as long as the trend is good, for the most part. Again, this also depends on what type of program you're trying to get into. If you're trying to go to an Ivy, or you're trying to go to some of the more top schools like in the program, maybe that's going to be different. But, I would say in general, as long as the trend is good, it's probably going to be fine. But I will say with the mental health stuff, I think, again, that goes back with making sure that you keep time for yourself, and make sure that you still have, that you're not just in the lab all the time, because frankly, at some point it becomes more of a disservice to you. If you're there all the time and it's just not working, sometimes that means you need to stop, take a breath, go home, take a nap, catch up on some sleep, watch your favorite show, and then come back later. Because like if you're just there and it's still not working, then you're probably psyching yourself out, you're probably increasing your anxiety, you're probably just feeling terrible, all just generalized. And it's like you just stop, just finish what you were doing, just go home, come back the next day. Sometimes you just need an actual like mental health break. So
another plug for ASPB on Brianna's vein is that join ASPB earlier on, because not only at ASPB have amazing opportunities for undergraduates, like travel grants, it's the ASPB SURF fellowship. Those will not only connect you with your peers in the undergraduate in the plant biology community, but also will connect you with PIs at these conferences. And you can start learning how to talk about science and talking about science to these PIs and getting to know the community much better in the plant biology world.
All great answers. We're just about out of time. I think we just talked a little bit about mental health. And the last time we did one of these Q&As, we spent a lot of time on it. We didn't spend quite as much this time, but I think just to close out, do any of our panelists have a tip they want to share for their favorite way or best way they've found to maintaining good mental health and life balance during grad school?
Get a therapist day one. To be completely honest, like I didn't start like seeing a therapist regularly until my third year maybe. And like, I didn't realize how much like racial gaslighting was going on and like all this stuff. And I just thought it was a me thing. And then just having somebody objective to talk to about like, this program is really messed up, or like this interaction is terrible. Should I like let them treat me like this? And then it's just like, no, if you were in a regular job, you would never do that. And so, yeah, like have a good therapist. And it's just nice to vent to somebody. And then you don't have to like worry about overbearing like on friends and family and things like that. It's useful.
I would say on top of that, which I really do condone because I got a therapist later and it is a godsend now. You need to know how to say no to your advisor, because they're going to push you and push you and push you until you break. And I don't want to say that in like a mean way. They don't know where you are necessarily, like mentally, how far you're being pushed, how much work you're doing outside the lab. They only see you in the lab or in meetings. So learning to say, I literally don't have time to do that, and them try to tell you that, yeah, you do. Sometimes you need to come back and say, I literally don't have time to do that. So you're going to have to give me some time. And I think that's really, just really important to be able to say no.
I'll just reiterate what I've kind of teased throughout this. Just make sure you have time for yourself and, you know, for friends. Like, I like playing board games and video games. I like going out with friends, getting drinks. I make sure that I still have time to do those things, you know, and it's like, sure, you maybe can't do it every week, you know, or if you do, maybe it's a limited time for certain weeks, but make sure you still like have those outlets for you. For me, like, that is just very beneficial. Like, I actually have a thing with some of my girlfriends, and we have gin and tonics. Like, so we just do so we call it G&T night, and we do that like every month. At least we have one G&T night. And so that's something for me where we're just like, you know, that's kind of where we just blow off some steam and have a good time. So, you know, you just got to find what works for you, though. You know, there's groups of people who want to do everything, whether that's hiking, whether it's board games, whatever it is for you. You know, you can find people at your school or in the area who you can do stuff with. And I would, you know, and if you don't want to do stuff with people, that's fine too. But just do your, you know, make sure you're still doing your hobbies then.
All right, well, we're just about out of time. Thank you so much to all of our attendees and panelists. Katie Rogers, I will turn it back over to you.
Yeah, thank you, everyone, to all of our panelists, our attendees, and Al for moderating. This has been a really great group, and it's been a wonderful discussion. We'd like to continue. There's a lot of question and answer that we haven't had the chance to get to, so I'm sure we'll be able to continue this conversation on Plantae. We actually have a comment section open on our blog. I'll put that in the chat here. So I would really encourage you to just continue sharing questions and your thoughts as well. As we go forward. Again, thank you all for joining. I would also encourage you to become ASPB members. Membership starts at $40 for undergrads. You can actually even join the ASPB early career plant science section as well. So you can join the ECPS section for $5 a year. And you actually right now don't have to be a member of ASPB to join that. So if cost is an issue, that's a great way to, you know, dip your toe in and get started with being involved in the society. So I would highly encourage you all to do that. Thank you for joining, and we will see you at the next webinar.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.